Welcome back to the channel. In this video I'm comparing the Arturia MiniFreak to the Hydrasynth Explorer. These are two excellent polyphonic synthesizers that come in the 37 key mini key variety, and they both have pros and cons, and there is some similarities and some definite differences, and if you're interested about why you would pick one over the other, hopefully by the end of this video you will have that knowledge. Now this is obviously a highly opinionated type of subject, so I won't be able to give you that answer directly. You are going to have to decide what's going to be the better synth for you if you're in the market. Now the MiniFreak is the newest of the two, came out a few months ago, and the Hydrasynth is about a year or so old, and it also comes from the Hydrasynth line, meaning that there's multiple versions of the Hydrasynth and they all have the same engine in them. So if you get the Hydrasynth Explorer, you have the same software in there as the Hydrasynth Deluxe, the biggest version essentially. So if you're worried about missing out on sound features by purchasing the smallest Hydrasynth out of them all, you're not actually missing out. You're getting the same Hydrasynth software inside this box. Now the Hydrasynth is 100% digital synth, meaning that it is basically software in a box that is then controlled from a hardware controller. You don't get any kind of VST or anything like that in a computer. So even if you plug it into USB or anything like that, it's not sending the software or the synth or anything like that to the computer. It is still technically a hardware synthesizer. It's just its internal mechanism is all digital, or software and code and all that. The MiniFreak is actually pretty close to that as well. It's an algorithmic synthesizer, but it does have analog filters and an analog VCA. So it's definitely more on the hybrid side of things. It has both digital elements and analog elements, but it also has a VST, or a software plugin, that directly copies what the MiniFreak does for your DAW. So if you purchase the MiniFreak, you basically get a license for the MiniFreak VST that can then be used in any of your DAWs, which is actually really nice. And Arturia, being Arturia, did an excellent job of copying the sound of the hardware version of the MiniFreak in the software version. So the question is really, why would you pick one over the other? And what are the real differences? To begin with, voice count. The MiniFreak is 6 voices. So you're going to be able to play a 6-note chord essentially. The Hydrasynth is 8 voices. You'll be able to play an 8-note chord. They're both capable of very complex sounds and tones, and are both excellent for performance. In terms of types of synthesizers that they are, the algorithmic side of the MiniFreak makes it a very unique set of tones that can come out of it, because the oscillators themselves are essentially programs, mini programs that can essentially be a synth in and of itself and do some special magic and all that stuff, and also potentially get upgrades to be different algorithms inside the synth. So that differs from the Hydrasynth, where the Hydrasynth is more of a traditional oscillator in that it has a waveform, and then you get to choose the type of waveform for it to produce sound. It is considered a wavetable synth, and that's because each oscillator, you get 3 of these, you can tell it what type of waves you want in there. So if you click on oscillator 1, you'll see single mode, and then you can change that to wave scan. And then in wave scan mode, you can edit the wave list and start giving it different wave shapes. For instance, if I start scrolling through wave 1, it shows you all these different wave shapes that are in the list right here. So you can put together 8 of these to create kind of like a custom wavetable that's from the actual wave shapes that are inside the Hydrasynth. So that's kind of its own unique way of how it handles wavetables. The MiniFreak does not do wavetables. The MicroFreak, the smaller brother of the MiniFreak, has a wavetable oscillator that you can choose in there, but it did not make its way over to the MiniFreak. And who knows, it's possible in the future it could actually make its way over to the MiniFreak, but as of this video, there is no wavetable specific oscillator inside the MiniFreak. That being said, the oscillators do a fantastic job of creating a multitude of variety of tones, so you're not going to be missing out and feeling like you can't get potentially a wavetable-y type of sound out of the MiniFreak. You absolutely can, it's just not set up directly that way to be types of waves that you could choose. But the Hydrasynth gives you a very direct, straightforward way of saying this is the wave, and then you can blend between multiple waves in the wavetable. So those are some fundamental differences of how the actual tones are generated, because the oscillator is the beginning of the tone for a synth. You know, you start with the sound, that's the oscillator, then it goes off into the filter and the VCA and all that stuff. Speaking of the filter, something that sets the MiniFreak apart is it being analog. It's marketed as an analog filter, and it's technically a 12 dB filter that can be low pass, band pass, high pass, and it's considered like a SEM filter style, which means it's very smooth. It just has a really nice, like, smooth character to it. In fact, let's initialize this preset. And here's the filter. So very smooth, right? So let's do the same thing on the Hydrasynth. I just initialized the patch. So now we have saw. I think it needs to be turned up a little bit. That's roughly the right volume matching right there. So I'm going to sweep the cutoff of the filter. Now the MiniFreak. You decide. Does that sound more analog than the Hydrasynth? I mean, to me, I don't think there's much of a difference. In fact, let's check the filter. So if I click on filter 1, it is a low pass 12 dB filter that's going on right there. So it's technically modeling a similar filter that's happening in the MiniFreak. Now again, it's marketed as an analog SEM filter, so it's supposed to be very smooth, and it does feel that way. And we should actually listen to the resonance as well. I'm going to boost the resonance around, say, 1 o'clock. So there's that. Now let's do the same thing on the Hydrasynth. Boost the resonance roughly around right here. Okay, now let's crank it. Okay, that was the MiniFreak. Now I'm cranking it on the Hydrasynth. Hopefully this doesn't clip. So there's some differences right there, obviously. Like there is definite character changes between each synth. Now, is one better than the other? That's the problem. For your ears, you might hear one and say, well, I clearly like the MiniFreak, or I clearly like the Hydrasynth. And that's totally fine for you. There's no wrong opinion, in my opinion, when it comes to sound generation. That's why people come up with interesting and new sounds, because they have different ears and their ear leads them to a different type of feel of what they want. It's totally normal to have a preference over one or the other. I also think it's normal that you might not feel like there's much of a difference between the two, because honestly, they are pretty close. And I'd be fine with either filter as well. Now, one thing that sets the Hydrasynth apart from the MiniFreak, and I really wish the MiniFreak actually had this, is the drive. So you can actually drive the filter in the Hydrasynth, the digital filter. You can drive it. So they built in modeling to have like this filter that gets driven. Whereas you cannot do that on the MiniFreak. You can pump up the volume on both oscillators. You know, each voice has 2 oscillators, by the way, on the MiniFreak. So you can max those volumes out and hit the filter, and you're not gonna make it get distorted or drive hard or anything like that. It's always going to be a really smooth, clean feeling filter, which for me, I personally feel like I want more drive and bite in my filter. I always do. If I'm given the option to drive the filter or apply a little distortion to it beforehand or something, I'm going to do that because I like those type of sounds, which is ironic because it's an analog filter, but I feel like I can get more of an analog distortion out of the Hydrasynth right from the get with this filter. For instance, I'll just actually, we'll keep the filter all the way open. So that's that. And then I'll open up the filter on here and I'll start putting up the drive. Obviously it's louder. You're starting to get some like rounding off the edges of the waveform, as you can see. Shows you on the oscilloscope that the edges are getting rounded off from that drive. Now, beyond just the one filter, you can also change the filter type as well. So, for instance, we can go Fat 12, Fat 24. Let's go Fat 24. Same thing. Sweep it. Now give it more drive. More resonance. Let's go resonance up on the MiniFreak and sweep the filter. Now, obviously, the MiniFreak is lower in volume now at this point because of the drive, but it does lack a certain low end, that chunk that's been added because of the drive filter, or the drive section from the filter on here on the Hydrasynth. So those are some characteristics right there. Again, it's not like earth-shattering, and it's not I suddenly want the Hydrasynth over the MiniFreak or anything like that. It's just things that you need to keep in mind if you're designing sounds. Which I should mention, if you don't plan on designing sounds specifically, if it's more of like a tone box that maybe you want to filter sweep every now and then or something like that, but it's mostly presets that you want to use. Both boxes are fantastic. They've got tons of presets. And there's obviously tons online as well that you can go and download and add to these boxes. So you can't go wrong on either one of these, if that's what you're looking for. I prefer the browse system for presets on the Hydrasynth over the MiniFreak. The MiniFreak, I tend to scroll through presets and just kind of like hope to get what I want. But for whatever reason, the Hydrasynth just feels a little bit more user-friendly for choosing categories and like types of instruments and that type of thing. Not a deal breaker by any means though. I'm just saying from personal experience in the past of what I've had with both these boxes. And by the way, if you'd like to hear some productions in action of both of these synthesizers, I have links below of productions that Meems and I have done. We've done like ambient tracks with the Hydrasynth, and we've done lo-fi soul type of stuff with the MiniFreak. So if you want to check those out, links below in the description. Continuing on with the filter though. This has two filters. It says drive morph right here. So what's going on is filter 1 has the drive and filter 2 has the morph. So morph means that it can shift between a low pass, band pass, high pass. It's easier to show you actually. Let me do this. Go like so. And then morph. So we'll put the cutoff in the middle. So right here it says low pass, band pass, high pass. So all the way to the left, you got low pass, middle, you got band pass, and all the way to the right, you got high pass. Now you can do a double filter type of thing in the MiniFreak, but it requires you to take your second oscillator in each voice and make it a processor of the first oscillator. So the first oscillator right here is a basic wave. Just open up the filter a little bit. Now if I click select and go to the oscillator 2, now I can change this to a processor and I can make it a multi-filter. Now the multi-filter will process the oscillator as well. We'll make it low pass 24. So you can definitely get a multi-filter type of thing going on, albeit different, of course, with both boxes. The Hydrasynth has it baked in, and you're not giving up one of your oscillators to be the second filter. It's already there. In fact, you have 3 oscillators as opposed to 2 oscillators. So there's a difference right there. So moving on from the filter, I think I'd like to talk about performance type of stuff, because we could get into sound design, but I'm gonna save that for after performance, because you might be more curious about just playing patches and how that feels, because they both have performance options for you. Pros and cons, once again. So let's talk MiniFreak. MiniFreak has these 2 touch strips right here, and they're multi-purpose. So if you press over here, you will get keyboard, bend, and wheel. So you have pitch bend. Let me open the filter up. And then modulation wheel. Right now the modulation wheel does nothing, but if you hold shift and press this, it turns on the vibrato. So you can have that automatically in whatever patch you're working on. And you can obviously assign multiple modulation destinations to the mod wheel to make it affect the patch in ways that you want. Then you have the macros. So if you click on the middle section right here, which is touch sensitive, you have these 2 macro strips. And the macro strips are really powerful because they allow you to assign up to 4 things per strip and then do positive or negative adjustments to whatever sound that's happening in there. And it's a really fun performance tool. So I'll show you. A few videos back, I did a patch creation video. Actually, if you want to know how to create a patch from scratch in MiniFreak, check out that video. I'll link it below. But this is the second patch I made in that video. So yeah, these touch strips are very, very useful. And in my opinion, I tend to default to these as opposed to the pitch bend and modulation wheel, which actually is kind of a con because I feel like I'm using the macros almost all the time and not using the modulation wheel or the pitch bend. Which is a bit of a shame. You know, because you have to switch back and forth if you want to do that. And then to round things out, you also have the gate spice type of thing for the sequencer and arpeggiator. So once again, if you want to do some spicy things actually I should change this. I guess we'll go bass. I'll turn the arpeggiator on. So spice does some really cool stuff. There's another patch that I made. Actually, it's the first patch in that video. So again, if you're curious about MiniFreak patch tutorial, link below. So you can control the gate length right here. And then spice changes things randomly. I like the arpeggiator and the sequencer very much in the MiniFreak. But once again, I can't mess with the macros with the gate spice thing going on right there. It's like gate spice or macros. Can't have both unless I hook up another MIDI controller to control them. The arpeggiator in the Hydrasynth is also very cool and has some nice random features. It's very flexible. They also just updated it to have additional octaves as well. So instead of up to 4 octaves, you can now do 6 octaves, I believe, which is something I should mention. They just dropped an update for all the Hydrasynth models. If you bought one, say 3 years ago, because I think they came out 3 years ago, then you've got basically new features. Like it's almost Hydrasynth 2.0 is what they're calling it. So that's really cool. So this synth has grown and is continuing to get more updates and features, like their arpeggiator getting more features. Not to say that the MiniFreak isn't, because Arturia is pretty good about updating their stuff and keeping it current. And now that it has a VST associated with it, a plugin, that's most likely going to get updates, and I could see the MiniFreak also getting updates in the future. More oscillator types, algorithms, and all that. Back to the arpeggiator on the Hydrasynth. So this is a patch that I made that basically relies heavily on the arpeggiator. Like I said, I like distortion. So what's cool about the arpeggiator on this is it can have like this randomization type of thing. These like triplets can kick in. It has a lot of flexibility right there, and it just feels like a good arpeggiator. Now, what's nice is that once the arpeggiator is going, you can actually set up macro knobs over here to do different things to the arpeggiator through the modulation matrix and all that. But you can also still have access to other modulation things with these knobs and not just be messing with arpeggiator type of stuff. So that's kind of the distinction between the two. If you're messing with the gate and the spice in the arpeggiator for this, you're not going to be doing the macros. Whereas on here, you could technically be doing macros that are messing with the arpeggiator settings and also changing the sound of the synth as well. So, differences right there. Back to the sequencer on MiniFreak. Very cool sequencer. I really like it. Fun, easy to make something happen. There is no sequencer on the Hydrasynth. So if you want a synth with a cool sequencer that can also do chords, because it doesn't have to be just a monophonic sequencer, the MiniFreak does a great job, and you have up to 64 steps and have a lot of fun with the recording lanes and all that. So really cool sequencer, a lot of fun, big thumbs up for that. There is no sequencer on the Hydrasynth. Now, some keen-eyed synthesists out there will be quick to point out that you can turn any of the LFOs, any of the 5 LFOs on the Hydrasynth into a step sequencer type of thing. You have to go through the menu system and do a little type of stuff, and it is nowhere near as functional it's nowhere near as intuitive as the MiniFreak's sequencer. Because on here, you just sequencer, and then you hit record, and then now we got. Let's slow down the tempo. As you can see, super quick. Like I just made a sequence really fast. You're not going to do that on the Hydrasynth. You're going to have to go in, menu dive, be like adjust this step, that step, and all that. So what the Hydrasynth does have though, over the MiniFreak in terms of performance stuff, is you do have these 4 knobs up here that act as multi-purpose knobs for controlling the synth and also macros. In the modulation matrix, you have 32 pages, 32 options to create modulation, source, and destination type of stuff. Much like the mod matrix on the MiniFreak, except MiniFreak is kind of laid out for you or tells you what's happening right here, whereas the Hydrasynth has it buried inside the synth. So you kind of have to menu dive a little bit for that. Like for instance, I have to page through to look at the different options on here for the modulation. Not that that's bad, because I actually really like the mod matrix on the Hydrasynth, and it's pretty easy because you could just be like, I want envelope 2 to go to oscillator 1 and do pitch stuff and all that. So very easy to make routings and make it happen. Easy on the MiniFreak as well. Both of them can seem complex if you don't understand synthesis. So I understand that perspective and being like, whoa, what's happening? How do I, what? You know? But it's honestly not that bad. It's actually pretty straightforward and easy. You just have to understand what the goal is and what you're doing on these synths. But back to the knobs here. So these are multi-purpose. They double as macro knobs, essentially. I actually don't know how many settings I can actually, or how many parameters I could assign to each one. I'm sure it's a lot more than 4. Because on the MiniFreak, the macros can only have 4 settings per strip to adjust things. Whereas each one of these knobs, I'm pretty sure I can have more than 4 adjust things. It's kind of like having 4 strips that you twist. Do you like twisting things? Maybe not. Maybe the touch strip is more performance. In fact, like I said, I do really like the touch strips right here. That feels good to me. On the Hydrasynth, it's definitely more picking something and then adjusting it over time. Maybe it wasn't the best example, but I think you get the idea. You know, it's 2 different ways of implementing modulation, performance type of stuff. That's performance things. And obviously the Hydrasynth has touch strip, pitch bend, modulation, wheel type of stuff right there. Same type of stuff on here, touch strip, pitch bend. And that modulation can obviously be assigned to a ton of different things in the synth engine of the Hydrasynth. Now, the final thing I'll talk about in terms of performance, which obviously is a big thing, is the keys themselves. So obviously they are mini keys and they're both 37, which is great. If you are used to the Arturia key step MIDI controllers, then you will know what you get with the MiniFreak. They're essentially the same thing. Let's turn off the sequencer. Off, please. There is aftertouch in this, which is nice. The keys feel good. You know, like I've played a lot of mini keys, and these are definitely some of my more appreciated mini keys. I like playing these keys. I don't mind them. The Hydrasynth, though, has a big ace, and that is poly aftertouch. And if you don't know what poly aftertouch is, it's a real game changer when it comes to performance and expressiveness, because regular aftertouch means that anytime you press into the keyboard, there's one setting that's happening for that aftertouch. Whereas poly aftertouch happens to send a signal per note. So for instance, on this chord, you can hear changes in there, and that's because the pressure of my fingers is doing that. And it's just a little touch. So for instance, really cool. When you turn off poly aftertouch or any aftertouch and play that patch, it is very boring. Like, it does not have that type of life and character. But when you play it on a Hydrasynth with the poly aftertouch, it becomes like this expressive, emotive type of synth. It really responds to the initial pressure and attack of the key. Really cool. That is a big selling feature because I'm pretty sure there is no other mini keys that has poly aftertouch. So if you are looking for a really good keyboard feel setup type of thing, the Hydrasynth, in my opinion, is the way to go. Now, this is also something that's extremely opinion-based, and I've had people say on comments in other videos that they actually returned the Hydrasynth because they didn't like the keyboard. You might be in that camp. You might play the Hydrasynth and be like, oh, I can't wait, and be like, ooh, what noodle? What is this? Probably gonna have to test these things out for yourself to see what you truly like and what you identify with when it comes to some of these performance tools. I'll also say that the Hydrasynth keys, I believe, are custom made from ASM or some sort of process where they decided to build their own keys, and it shows because they definitely feel different. And I think that's one of the things. Like, you might not like the gush or the, you know, the throw or the gush is the wrong word, but there's like a gush to it, like a certain like gush happens when you hit the key. And that might be a big turnoff for you when you play it. For me, playing it and getting that expression is what sells me on it. I'm like, oh, awesome. Yeah, it feels different from the other keys. Like, this feels more like this minimal gush on the MiniFreak. But on this guy, I don't know, there's just something, there's more give. There's more like space where it hits the end. Yeah, it's different. You might not like it. And by the way, if you plan on picking up any of these synths or any other synths potentially, and you want to support the channel, consider using our affiliate links. Our affiliate of choice is Zounds. We've been using them for years, and we've also been using their no credit plans for years as well. And they have a really good return policy. So if you decide to pick up one of these synths and you don't like it, you have like a long 30-day window to decide. Basically no pressure, you know, like you can check it out. If you like it, great, you've made a good choice. If not, no worries, you can pick up something else. So we personally recommend Zounds. They're our go-to affiliate, and if you use our links, then it helps out the channel. So thank you very much. Okay, moving on to sound design. If you are the type of person that is looking for a deep sound design experience and want to know which one of these synths will do the most of that sound design experience, then the Hydrasynth, by far. It is very deep, very complex synthesizer. You will spend probably years, honestly, working on patches and creating new sounds with this box. It is very, very complex. If you glance over to this side of the Hydrasynth, they basically lay out the synth engine in front of you. And just by looking at it, you can already tell that it has 5 different envelopes and 5 different LFOs. In direct comparison to the MiniFreak, it has 2 LFOs and 2 envelopes. So not that the MiniFreak is basic, because it's not. It's definitely an excellent synthesizer. It does not have the sound design potential that the Hydrasynth has. And honestly, it doesn't need it. It makes excellent tones and does an excellent job with the way it's already set up. Back to the Hydrasynth, in further discovery, you'll notice that there's 3 oscillators. And the first 2 oscillators, oscillator 1 and 2, have 2 mutants. Mutant 1, 2, 3, 4. What's a mutant? It's actually kind of like what's going on in the MiniFreak, where if you take the first oscillator, and then you send that audio of the first oscillator into the second oscillator and do some manipulation to it, you essentially have what's happening with the mutants on here. That's kind of an oversimplification, but to give you an idea, that's essentially what's happening. Thing is, the first oscillator has 2 mutants, and then the second oscillator has 2 mutants. So your ability to create unique tones is just exponential in comparison. As mentioned earlier, the oscillators in the MiniFreak are algorithmic, so they have complex options and changes that can happen, and further future updates could make completely brand new algorithms that could potentially challenge what's happening on the Hydrasynth in terms of that mutant relationship and all that. But it is simplified to be direct and straightforward for sound design, because each oscillator has a wave, timbre, and shape option, and that's what you manipulate and change on those oscillators. Where on the Hydrasynth, each oscillator has a wavetable that you can specifically choose if you want, and then the mutants can have multiple options. Like if you click on mutant 1, FM linear, wave stack, a lot of different options in the Hydrasynth. And to round things out, again, it's got 2 filters baked in. You're not like giving up an oscillator for one of those filters. And then you have pre-effects, so you could do something like distortion or EQ or compression, and then dedicated delay and reverb, and then into post effects for additional distortion, EQ, compression, stuff like that. Over on the MiniFreak, you do have 3 digital effects slots, and they're excellent digital effects. But you do have to pick and choose which one is going to be delay, reverb, distortion, compression, phaser, flanger, you know, chorus, that type of stuff. You could potentially have chorus on pre-effects on the Hydrasynth, and then you got your delay, reverb, and then more compression or distortion on post effects. More flexibility on the Hydrasynth. Now back to the MiniFreak. In terms of sound design, I will say that it feels very immediate. More immediate than the Hydrasynth. And that's not to say that Hydrasynth is bad by any means. But what the MiniFreak has is more of the panel's laid out and you can reach and grab stuff pretty fast. You do have a bit of menu dive, and some things can change context depending on what you're in. Like for instance, the oscillators, you know, depending what oscillator you're in, it's going to change context of what wave, timbre, and shape is. So you got to keep that in mind. But overall, it feels pretty direct and straightforward to be able to grab stuff. Like if you want to adjust the envelopes and the analog filter at the same time, and also maybe adjust the macro strips, like that's all possible with a performance type of thing or a sound design type of thing. Whereas on the Hydrasynth, you're always going to be relying on selecting the type of module that you're editing, like oscillator 1, and then going to the macro knobs to make the adjustments. So you're never going to be able to adjust the envelopes of things and also adjust the macros that you set up for performance with the Hydrasynth. You're always going to have a trade-off of getting deeper into the synth with these knobs to do the sound design versus having some stuff on the MiniFreak, or the majority of the stuff really, available to you on the surface. So there is that. That being said, I've done patches on both these boxes and it's a fun experience across the board. Like I enjoy making patches on the MiniFreak, I enjoy making patches on the Hydrasynth. My brain thinks different, depending on the synth. So I think it's a good thing, really. You kind of get like a different perspective and you start thinking of things differently because of the layouts and the way they're designed. But the Hydrasynth is going to be a little bit more menu-ish, menu dive-ish, but it's not bad. It's pretty well thought out and feels good. And the MiniFreak will have things that is buried into a menu, like for instance, VCA, velocity to VCA level. You have to actually go into a menu for that if you want to adjust that specifically for a patch. But overall, the MiniFreak feels like a fantastic immediate synth. It's also my recommendation for a first-time synthesizer purchase, because I think it has the flexibility, the sound design, and the immediate features available to you, and it's a good synth to learn on, because if you learn the MiniFreak, then future synthesizers will definitely feel more approachable for you in that regard. The Hydrasynth could be a bit much for someone to learn on, personally. Again, because you have to juggle thoughts of which type of modules you're going through in the sound engine, and then adjusting them with these knobs. And that might be a little difficult to connect initially. Then again, you might be the type of person that excels with a lot of complexity, and it could be the perfect synth for you. Finally, to round things out, there's some options that each of these synths have that the other does not. For instance, there's modular options on the Hydrasynth, you know, CV gate and all that. That is not on the MiniFreak. And there's also audio in on the MiniFreak, and the Hydrasynth does not have audio in. So if you want to process audio in like the MiniFreak synth engine, you can do that if you want. But if you want to send stuff to your modular, like if you have a modular rig and you want to send stuff with the Hydrasynth, then there's that ability on there. That's my thoughts though. I don't know if I helped you decide which synth you should purchase. They're both excellent synthesizers. They're also both 600 bucks. The Hydrasynth right now is 500 as of the recording of this, but it's only on sale for the rest of the month of April 2023. And you might be watching this video like a year later or something like that, so who knows. If you price check with the affiliate links, you'll be able to know right now and, you know, make a decision that way if price is the reason. But basically, they're both 600 bucks. They're excellent synthesizers. Personally, I don't think you can go wrong with either one unless it's your very first synth, in which case I would lean more towards the MiniFreak. Or maybe the Minilog XD. That's also an option as well, which also is pretty close in price range as well. Yeah, that would have been a good one to include. Maybe another video, right? Hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you did, a like, subscribe, comment below helps out with the algorithm greatly. I would definitely appreciate that. And again, our affiliate links, if you do plan on picking up one of these, would be awesome. Or if you plan on picking up any synth for that matter. And if you want to hear some of the productions that we've done with these synthesizers, definitely check the links below. But that's it. I'll see you next time for another one. Peace.